So key thing that you've got to get right when you're doing 3D is your image alignment. If that isn't correct, then many pains can follow. The only difference between your images on screen should be the horizontal separation between those images, giving you your 3D, whatever style you choose to do your 3D in. Thus, image size, vertical alignment, keystoning, color, all of those have to be exactly the same in each eye, leaving just that disparity between the images, giving you your parallax and giving you your 3D. And now, you've probably heard a lot about this thing called the depth budget. What the depth budget is a combination of background parallax and foreground parallax. So if you have a background parallax of, say, 1%, that means that the separation between the images on screen, if it was, say, between the edge of the 5 and the beginning of the percent, you would measure that. If it's 1%, it's because that is 1% of the distance from here to here. Now, on this screen at 25 foot, background parallax is going to be about, 1% is going to be about 2.5 to a bit more than that, 2.75 inches. And 1% is a sort of good starting point for background, for good background parallax, going up to anything for normal, if you like, base 3D, 1.5%, half to 1.5% negative parallax coming out of the screen. You can go easily up to 1% negative parallax with. Actually, most people wouldn't even think that shot is a big out-of-screen shot, but we'll come on to what I think it is later and why I think it's important that for storytelling, that bit of 3D is explored. Then for the special effecty type stuff, you might have as much as 5–10% parallax to give something right out of the screen and right in your face. So keep it at about 1% as a starting point for your background, because really it's a maxim that most of the time bad 3D has simply got, aside from all those things up here, vertical, keystoning, color, assuming all those are correct, the next thing about bad 3D is if there's just too much 3D in the shot, there's too much depth budget in the same shot. And particularly if there's too much parallax in the background, it makes it much, and particularly again on a cinema screen, if you're asking your eyes to bend out anything more than ½ a degree per eye, it actually physically gets quite painful. We can bend our eyes in until something sits right in front of our nose, and for negative parallax, that's what you're doing. If there's an object hovering in theater space, we're doing what we do anyway, pretty much. At least one set of our muscles is when we watch anything coming close to us. If we're being asked, on the other hand, to bend our eyes out, we don't normally do that, and you go beyond ½ a degree or so at your peril. I think there's become, personally, I think there's become a depth obsession. I think there's become an anti-gimmick obsession, an anti-out of screen. Tends to get bandied around by people who haven't actually done that much 3D. The entire negative space is now being lumped into this gimmick part of 3D. It's almost as though if there's any negative parallax at all, it must be theme park, it must be gimmick, therefore I'm not going to use it. Now, in my humble opinion, there really is a genuine danger of throwing away 0.5 of the 3D here. Because I think that there's the whole sort of idea of needing to explore the 0.5 to 1.5% of negative parallax, I think that's one of the key next stages in the development of 3D storytelling. Anybody who's watched films like Megamind, Monsters vs. Aliens, Shrek Goes Forth, they're all done by a guy who I think is one of the finest stereographers around, Phil McNally. We call this the bulge. People who sort of subscribe to this orthodoxy of 3D, we call it the bulge. It's negative parallax which does not feel like it's completely in your face or out of screen. Now, there were shots in the clip reel, like the sharks, way out there. Skater Boy coming up, way out there. Let's go and have a look at some of those shots and see what sort of parallaxes are involved. These are just anaglyph 3D, so you won't use your glasses. And then within 3 or 4 minutes, we're going to be skipping on to happily to meerkats. I just wanted to set up how I discussed doing this 3D project, the Meerkat project, with Caro before we set off on the adventure. So this is a frame from IMAX. This distance here, that's about 1%. Can you take as much light off the screen as possible, please? Lighting person, kindly. You like take this big spot out on me or wherever it's flooding? Great. Thanks very much. So here you can see there's just a tiny bit of negative in the foreground, and really there shouldn't be any negative parallax in this, because why on earth would that tree, which is so obviously hundreds and hundreds of feet away, why should that be in a theatre? It's had to get through this very small hole. So really I should probably redo this anaglyph and stick the whole lot behind the screen, and then you'd have a 1.3% background parallax, very nice and comfy background parallax in this shot from an IMAX movie. This is what's called a hyperstereo shot. So the cameras were actually 5 foot apart when we did this shot. If you had them significantly closer, the normal interactuals that people use for filming, a couple of inches, it would just look completely flat. But as you see here, this is the closest object with virtually no parallax on it, so it's around the screen plane. And that's the furthest object with about 1% of parallax. So there's 1% depth budget in this shot, giving you this gorgeous sort of 3D feeling all the way into the screen. And that's been achieved by pulling the cameras apart further than you would ordinarily take them. It does have the effect of miniaturizing, of making things feel small, because of course it's as though you're a giant looking at it, and then when we're now seeing through the eyes of a giant, it means that therefore what we're looking at must be quite small. But because we don't really ever know how big trees are and how big mountains are, you can sort of hide it and get away with it. And hopefully you'll agree that that shot feels sort of magical rather than miniaturized. This shot from the sort of Bollywood scene in the London Eye, again, a nice cozy, slightly even more cautious than 1%, giving an accurate 2.5 inches background parallax for the screen it was designed for. But we've got a just over 1% negative on the lead dancer there. I defy anybody to say when they were watching that shot that it felt like this dancer was literally sitting in your lap. Obviously there were petals coming down because it was made for an attraction and there's that expectation of big 3D. But in terms of the dancers, I hope that what you were beginning to feel, which is what Julian as intention was to have some sort of relationship with these dancers. We didn't want them other, inside, over there, through the window. We wanted presence. Feeling, some sort of intimacy with those dancers. And the way you get that, and the way you play with that as a story point, is by bringing things just a little bit off screen. Don't be frightened to bring things into negative space. Then, of course, once you then want to go further to that, this probably did start to feel like a little bit of a reach out and touch moment. Well, that's because we got a 3.2% negative parallax on it, which you can absolutely pepper throughout your film. And particularly, say, this shot, again, I mean, did this feel like the sort of shot you might have wanted to see in Flying Monsters? Might you wanted to have seen a pterosaur this close? I would. I mean, I'm not dissing it at all, but that was a very cautious 3D project with vast majority of the 3D behind the screen. I would have loved to have seen a pterosaur with 4.2% negative parallax and hovering in front of me. That's what I'd like to have seen. You now can take it in extremis, and the extremis in this one, but this is a classic theme park shot, which is all part of 3D storytelling. I mean, you know, a theme park or an attraction experience is just a valid storytelling 3D experience. How do I get that extreme 3D? In this case, it's a composited bubble on a live action shot. That's got 11.3% negative parallax. The shot doesn't start like that, of course. It evolves so that your eyes are steadily and steadily converging and converging and converging until you're looking at this bubble on the end of your nose. The bubble pops and a water jet drops some water down on your head. The kids go wild and the parents are absolutely delighted. You know, the kids have got this memorable moment that they'll hold with them for many moons to come. So that's the whole sort of range of 3D, obviously going right up to this end, which you would not use in a feature film for storytelling. You might use it in a horror film, who knows? You might use it in some extreme genre film, but working back on some of those shots with things like 1.5, even 2, 3% negative parallax, absolutely don't be afraid of using those in storytelling. So this whole sort of idea of then certainly using this notion of a bulge, of a presence, of feeling as if you are there. For my money, you don't feel as if you're there when you're watching a 3D film if the entire thing is happening the other side of the screen. You feel like you're an observer looking through a window, watching stuff happening over there. If you bring a little bit of stuff into the screen space, it's quite subliminal, quite subtle, but you get this feeling of presence. And that is a very powerful tool, because then, of course, you can use that in all sorts of dramatic configurations for how do I identify or empathize with a character? Do I want to feel like that character is over there? Fine, I'll stick him in positive space. Do I want to either be frightened by or loved by or intrigued by someone or something? Bring them forward, bring them into personal space. You have a fundamentally different relationship with things when they're in personal space. So that then was perfect, we thought, when I spoke to Kara about this whole idea of 3D, of being able to be in the personal space and be intimate and be down at ground level with lovely meerkats. And this was just there was a big thing in broadcast about natural history a while ago, and we were featured in it. And so all I did to Kara was show us some stuff, talk about the 3D, and then we'd been speaking about partnering up for a while, and we partnered. So I would now like to introduce Caroline Hawkins, we'll have some questions at the end. So I'll introduce Caroline Hawkins, and she will sort of tell the backstory, and then we'll move forward into the current Meerkats 3D story. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Phil. Right, so how did Meerkats 3D come about? Well, in 2004, I was asked to come up with a long-running series idea for Animal Planet International. And the budget wasn't huge, it was about £50,000 per episode. So it was pretty obvious that wasn't going to stretch very far in natural history terms. So I thought maybe it would be fun to come up with a new way of doing natural history. And I thought, I'll do a soap opera about meerkats. So I came up with Meerkat Manor, which, strangely enough, it had been a long time since a meerkat film had been made. There'd really only been one major meerkat film before that, which was called Meerkats United, which was produced by the BBC in 1987 and fronted by David Attenborough. And it was extremely popular. It was voted Britain's favourite wildlife documentary of all time, I think, by viewers. But nothing much had been made since. So I thought, well, they're obviously popular, and these little upstanding creatures are sort of very heartwarming and charming, and they were ideal subject matter for a soap. So it proved correct, because they were extremely popular, as it turned out.